In this update, we're tracking this low pressure center that did spawn several tornadoes yesterday in Nebraska. That's continued to spin this morning, and it left some heavier snows into the Rocky Mountains in its wake. But that will be traversing across with the heavier rains really draped across a good part of Minnesota as well as into Iowa. And then the heavier rains really extend into later on this afternoon in northern portions of Illinois, as we'll have the coolest temperatures so far of the season. We'll be diving in from the northwest, so those temperatures will be dropping on the backside. They've got their first freeze warnings and freeze watches of the season across portions of Utah into northern portions of Arizona and into eastern Colorado, and even portions of the Texas Panhandle may see their first freeze. And then you got some higher winds really associated with that low pressure center. Those are cranking at some 50, 60, maybe even upwards to 70 miles an hour still later on this afternoon, as this will be traversing across. And that's left some heavier snows across a good part of, into the Rockies. So the ski lovers are going to be enjoying this fresh coat of powder up there. They haven't seen really much snow so far. So yeah, I definitely enjoy this while it lasts, as that cold air will continue to kind of plunge in on the backside as this low pressure will be moving out. And there's where the, cold front, you kind of have a drier front, further south. There's just really no lift coming in out west. All the instability will be mainly highlighted across northern portions of Nebraska, but eventually heading into Iowa with the heavier rains across eastern Iowa, but especially in northern Illinois, this blanket could be looking at 1 to 3 inches of rain later on this afternoon. And then you got your warm front that's going to be lifting up into the mid-Atlantic. And this area of instability and this low pressure will be mainly highlighted and be traversing across this boundary. So it will eventually impact Pennsylvania and getting into New Jersey, as well as into New York City again with those heavier rains. But I don't actually think it even reaches, the Boston region, because look at the kind of the moisture content as this will be traversing across. You've got drier air that will continue to move in on the backside, so you got clearer skies as the winds start to subside on the backside, and this low pressure will be highlighted over heading into tonight, into the overnight hours, into Indiana, especially into Ohio, eventually sneak into West Virginia. And you still got the instability further south, where Florida continues to be impacted from this training disturbance into the Gulf of Mexico. But that's going to leave a pretty nice viewing for the eclipse that's coming up tomorrow morning. So it's going to originate in Oregon around 9 o'clock their time and end in Texas through San Antonio, through Corpus Christi around noontime tomorrow. And that's going to be the totality path. And the further away you are, you can see where you're like 80% covered, 70% covered, 60% covered. So yeah, so definitely get out and enjoy this eclipse with your glasses on going into tomorrow morning, heading into, around noontime, tomorrow for the eclipse. And you should have a pretty good viewing, because I'm not expecting, terribly too many clouds across this pathway. So, and there it is, right? It leaves a pretty clear sky back behind you. It's going to leave a pretty nice weekend for really a good part of the country. The only instability is going to be really highlighted where that low pressure is. And yes, you have another weekend up here in the Northeast, 5 out of 6 weekends of with more heavy rain across Pennsylvania and New Jersey and New York City. They just get hit again on the weekends. It seems like it continues to happen through the Carolinas, and that low pressure will be continued to move out. And I think by the time we head into Sunday morning, that low pressure will be kind of moving offshore by now, bringing all the rain with it, leaving those clearer skies on the backside. So it's going to be a pretty nice weekend for really a good part of the country. There's the rain over the next kind of 60 hours. So there's the dry slot on the backside, and you have all the instability really highlighted over, central and southern portions of Minnesota, into Wisconsin, into Iowa, especially into northern Illinois, into portions of Indiana, going into Ohio, but getting into the mid-Atlantic region, into Pennsylvania, and especially New Jersey again, New York City. That's where the heavier rains are going to be falling. with this lower pressure, then you'll have lighter amounts further south into the southeast, more or less, kind of half-inch amounts. And then you have these convective bandings still unloading across a good part of South Florida. But there's the clear skies back behind it. So you have the low pressure on Sunday afternoon will continue to move out in the open waters of the Atlantic. And then you'll have the high pressure on the backside with the clearer skies, the lighter winds, and that will allow the temperatures to drop and bring some of the probably the coolest anomalies further south all the way down into the deep south. So you're going to be experiencing those pleasant, like fall like air, crisp fall like air as you wake up on Sunday morning for really a good part of the country, as this cold front will be continue to push all the way down into the deep south and eventually head all the way into Mexico, as everybody is going to be getting into the action, and it's going to bring the clearer skies back behind it. So typically what happens after a pretty dominant system, it kind of clears the atmosphere out back behind it for several days, and that's what's going to happen. So you not only do you have a nice weekend, but you've got a nice, like really Monday and Tuesday coming up. So you got a good stretch of maybe 3 to 4 days there. But we do have more rain coming in really just for the coastal regions around the Pacific Northwest. So places like into Seattle, into Portland again, we'll be getting that kind of that lighter to moderate rain entering back in the picture on Monday. And there's where the cold air is, right? It's rather unusual to have the southeast and especially most of Florida having the coolest anomalies of the country, but that's exactly what's going to happen as high pressure will be continue to build out west, and most of the instability is really the central and eastern 2/3 of the US, but especially into the southeast will bring some of the coolest temperatures, and it really drops going into Florida. We're talking upper 40s for the Florida panhandle. So it's going to be feeling really nice and pleasant conditions, for them. But once we get into the middle of next week, we'll be having to watch another system that's going to be coming in from the north. We'll have some of the, kind of a weakness in the upper levels. We'll have a low pressure center start to form and dive down in from Canada, and that will set the stage for kind of our next storm system as we go into the middle to the end of next week. So on the surface map, you can see the storm system starting to kind of wind up, right? It's down to about a 995 millibar low pressure in southern portions of Canada, as this will have some higher winds associated with it. But further south, look how far north it is. Again, there's not much lift out west, right? So you'll have another kind of reinforcing shot of a cool front further south, but there's not much left. So most of the instability should be, east and going into the eastern portions of the US, and it takes a kind of an unusual turn. So this is a system that will actually just dive straight southbound. So that's kind of an unusual turn as this continues to likely intensify heading into your Thursday time frame, as which should be highlighted over back of into Iowa again. That will eventually drop into Missouri with some higher winds, and it's diving back down into the southeast. So you have yet another reinforcing shot of cooler air for that region, as this low pressure center will be getting its act together again going into the next weekend, and it's heading northbound. And it's leaving some cooler anomalies in its wake. So yes, very unusual to really continue to see the southeast and all the way down to the Florida continue to remain on the chillier side, while much of the western regions continue to be on the kind of the well above average side. Yes, you have the snow in the mountain regions, but there's there's really no Arctic air to speak of. But definitely some fall-like air for sure, as this will have the coolest anomalies down here in the southeast, and that low pressure center will continue to dive. So here's the setup on the jet stream as we head into possibly next weekend, as this low will be deepening down to the southeast and then really start to kind of intensify back into the Carolinas again. And then, yes, likely head back into the Northeast for yet another wet weekend. Unfortunately, guys, I mean, you continue to be inundated with literally kind of storm after storm after storm, you know, hitting your area, it finds a way, because this system was diving south, and then it puts the brakes on in the southeast, and then it lifts back up again into the northeast. And it looks like that's going to happen. So the rest of the country, where you have been kind of dry, and that drier slot looks to be continuing in that drier slot, as we'll have yet another storm system will be tracking through the Ohio Valley by the time we head into possibly next Sunday. And then, yes, more heavy rain back into the DC region, back into Delaware, into Pennsylvania, into New Jersey. And yeah, even New York City looks to be, you know, impacted even with this storm system. So you stay wet this weekend, and it looks like you're going to continue to stay wet next weekend. So if you break it down just really over the next 10 days, there's the drier slot. All that brown is, you know, well below average precipitation, really not much of anything to speak of. You'll have all the instability where these low pressures are. So you'll have the heavier rains that are traversing across South Dakota, through Minnesota, you know, through Wisconsin, northern Illinois, and getting into the Ohio Valley, into Kentucky, West Virginia, but heading into the mid-Atlantic and back into the Northeast. And that's where the highest anomalies likely are be, back into Florida again. So really the same areas that get hit this week looks to be getting hit next week. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, and definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch my next update, why I protect you before and after the storm.